Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and a very warm welcome to Samista Jugwanth, Technical Director of Zutari. We're so glad to have you with us, as well as all our listeners. To all our listeners that are new, the Fifth Disciplines podcast unpacks everything to do with people, brand, and systems. And our goal and our content is geared towards enabling climate change players to scale across Africa. So if you haven't already, remember to subscribe or follow us on LinkedIn for the latest news and updates. Samista, really chuffed to have you with us, and we're going to be talking on the concept and theme of people. Samista, would you like to maybe just give our listeners a bit of context around what Zutari does and what the structure is of the teams?
Oh, thank you for having me, Lindy. So I work for a company, Zutari. We're an engineering and management consultancy. We operate across Africa and Middle East, and we work across the markets. So from water to energy, buildings, railways, ports, anything you can imagine infrastructure related, we have a professional for it. Our staff complement is about maybe 2,500 strong, and that's ranging from engineers to scientists to project managers, architects, and yeah, we've been around for over 90 years, I think.
Cheapers. So that's
Yeah.
obviously also a lot of teams, new teams working together,
Yes.
which creates, an interesting dynamic. So, Mr. Maybe before we get into all the questions that I have for you, tell us a bit about your career journey. What got you to where you are now?
Okay, well, when I was leaving school, I had no idea what I wanted to study. It felt like everything was interesting. But my father, who was the main breadwinner at the time, he was um, under the threat of retrenchment. And so for me to study, it meant I had to get a bursary. So I randomly applied for anything numbers related. And one of the most stable bursaries I got was for a company called BKS, and it was in civil engineering. And so I chose that, not knowing really much about what it was about at all. And some things work out the way it's meant to be. Once I actually started studying, I worked all my vacations at this company. And it was around the time of just before the World Cup, Soccer World Cup. And so we were working on the most iconic projects. You can imagine being sort of 18, 19 years old and getting to work on building the stadium and a new airport and like the Durban Promenade. All of these were iconic. It's so, so exciting. And so I really fell in love with what we were doing, which made studying a lot easier. And when I started working full time, I hit the ground running because obviously I had all of this excitement built up. And from quite a young age, I started managing projects. And then just before I turned 30, I was headhunted by the current company I'm in to start up a water division in their Durban office. And so my role went from mainly technical and project management
Mhm.
to still being that, but also a large portion of it was business development. And so um, sort of developing a lot more people skills than, what engineers generally are known for. And then maybe in the last 5 years, my career has taken also now a little bit of a different change. Was quite fortunate to be part of two programs, one in Silicon Valley, San Francisco space on the technology side, and one in Stockholm on the
Wow.
sustainability side. Yeah, and so I have the exposure to new ideas and new methods. So I've led me in the last 5 years. I've been practicing a field called strategic foresight,
Okay.
and looking how we can apply that methodology into infrastructure development.
That's amazing. What, out of interest, sort of what methodologies does
Oh,
that
okay.
get?
So I can talk for hours on this. It's something very exciting. So it's like a good science fiction movie. Like the only point of truth is what we have right now, like the
Yeah.
current, the present. And as the future progresses, you have a number of decisions that can be made. Your decisions, people around you, the environment, context. And as time goes forward, the amount of possibilities that can exist because of all of these permutations of these decisions sort of just get increased like a cone. And often when we make decisions or we design infrastructure, we design for the most probable, we predict the most probable outcome, and we design for
Yeah.
that. But if there's one thing we know is that our future is so unpredictable. It's so complex.
Yeah.
One plus one doesn't always equal two. The rate at which technology is developing. I mean, COVID threw us for a spinner, right? There's so many things that are happening that we cannot predict. And so strategic foresight is about forecasting possible futures. So you kind of think about what are the possibilities that can happen, and you have a plan for that. So you find the risks and you know your mitigations up front and you find your opportunities and you move towards them. And I think what I really love about it is it's a very human intuitive method. I mean, everyone has hopes and dreams and fears, and we protect ourselves of the things that can happen. And so just trying to apply that into a very traditional and quantitative field like engineering has been interesting.
That's amazing. I mean, also, I know that you've published a bit of information and insights
Yeah,
around the future of engineering, and that
yeah,
ties into exactly what we're sort of talking about. It's so uncertain, tech advances. But what do
yeah.
you see? I mean, maybe tell our listeners a bit about what you've written up on the future of engineering and where you see it going.
I think what had happened was when sort of generative AI started coming out, there was like a lot of fear, like, oh no, it can generate this report and can do these things very easily and it can design and there's software for this. It had struck me at that time, like, surely the people felt that way when you had things like AutoCAD coming through and people were no longer drafting by hand. Our job
Yeah.
type just evolves. It's not that it's obsolete. And maybe this anecdote is quite interesting. So while I was in San Francisco, I interned at a company called Autodesk. And we got to spend a lot of time with the C-suite staff there. The CEO once kind of told me like what his dream for engineering design was. And he wanted to almost have a VR headset that you put it on and designing was gamified. So in the space, you could sort of
Yeah.
in a game environment, tell the computer, or tell the software what you wanted to design. It would give you a whole lot of permutations of this. You would pick and choose, a little bit like Iron Man, and then it
Yeah.
would go automatically to 3D printing or sort of robotics in order to create these pieces that could be shipped to site and constructed. I mean, in San Francisco, they're doing this now. They can put up like a 5-story apartment block in 100 days because they do offsite
Wow.
construction and they ship it to site and put it up. So I think that's what really the future of engineering is. It's really the key no longer is the design. I mean, it's almost like Excel. Software is like Excel now. What I think now engineering is about how good we are at knowing what has to be designed, how good we are at being able to specify what has to be designed. So it's very much like prompt engineering on steroids. And I think this is
Yeah.
where softer skills like systems thinking and strategic foresight and sort of stakeholder engagement comes in to more because we need to be able to define very clearly what is needed and those the context it
Yeah.
has to be in and the conditions that have to be met because a computer can design what we tell it to, so we have to be really good at telling it what to design.
Yeah.
I think that's where engineering really is heading, being better at the specification part of it and the performance specification part.
Yeah. And I suppose having that nuance into the people side of it, because that isn't something that is tangible. So, like you say, having that foresight to understand what maybe those
Yeah,
future needs are and applying that into something that's real. And like you said, like that stakeholder
totally.
communication is absolutely key.
It is. I mean, so in the past, the way we value, yeah, the value in engineering has been, the tallest building or the longest bridge. It's always been the biggest and the best. But I think now we're living in a society where um, what is important is a value it adds to people and the environment. And so that's sort of like a triangle of people or community, environment, and economy now is important. And so when we design infrastructure, it's how well are we meeting those needs? Well can we identify and how well can we meet those needs? And how well can those needs adapt? Like what we put
Yeah.
in, how well can it adapt to those changing needs?
Yeah. And from a practical perspective, you've touched on the communication and foresight. What other soft skills and traits do you think that engineers need to start applying and creating healthy habits around? If you put it into a practical perspective, what does that look like?
I think one of the things we need to do is to ask more questions. Historically, when we're given a project to design, we're given something already. So you're designing this is a value, this is what we're doing. I think one of the best
Mm,
skills, and I've seen a few good engineers already do this already, is to question like, is this actually the right solution? Right? There's problem
mm,
solving, but there's also problem finding. Asking the right questions to
yeah,
know the full context and to question why we're doing things so that we can get the best solution. Not just have a textbook solution. Like,
yes.
here's all the parameters we're getting, here's a method, here's the output, here's the standard details. Go for it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, one of the other things I wanted to ask do you have examples or in your experience where you've opened that door to collective thinking or adopting a new approach or possibly even building trust within teams to solve problems in a new way? In your experience, what does that look like?
Maybe an example of that on the technical side is maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, we were approached by one of our clients to do a water demand study. And when you calculate water demand, there's typically 3 to 4 variables that are used. What we did is that we
Mm,
applied some strategic foresight design methodologies to it, where we said, well, let's step back from just the 3 to 4 we know. Let's actually have a workshop with stakeholders. So we had a range of engineers from sort of very young to very experienced. And that youth is also very important because they tend to ask a lot more questions. They're not as
yeah.
biased in their thinking because of experience. So that diversity is very important. We had our client, so not just from the planning or engineering divisions, but also from billing and the ops guys. We had academics and we had users. And through these workshops and these tools and these methods, we ended up with over 100 variables that affected water demand in the city. So things from, vandalism or political unrest to what if this was privatized or what if there was a national disaster and the water was contaminated. So all of these different situations basically came up with 100 variables, which we then went through another set of methodology to create 4 scenarios. And we basically designed or estimated water demand for these 4 scenarios that could occur. And from that information now, the city has the ability to plan its infrastructure, and bulk infrastructure is extremely expensive, to be able
Mm,
to adapt to any of these scenarios because they have a game plan already in mind. And whatever future does show
yeah.
up, A, they have the ability to guide us to some of that future. But B, even if the things that we don't have power control over happen, we have some ability to react in a very constructive way towards it. And just from a personal level, if you see the amount of enthusiasm and innovation that comes when you give people the opportunity to think outside of the box,
Mm.
and to also brainstorm not just with people who are very similar to them, but people who are doing different job types and different ages and from different backgrounds,
Yeah.
you get a lot of value.
But I think on that point, I mean, you brought up some really interesting themes around that communication and sort of using the whole brain. And one of the things that I'm sort of taking away from it and sort of thinking about here is a lot of times, and it's nice, you know, expressly said that having different levels, creates more ideation. And I think sometimes as leaders, you get a little bit scared to maybe ask those questions that maybe the younger generations are less scared or have less biases around asking because they've got nothing to lose, and as a leader sometimes you're too scared to ask those questions. So having that team
Mm,
environment where you have these different thoughts and that vulnerability and that trust building happens is so key. Don't just go in there thinking you have all the answers kind of thing, and create that dialogue between teams.
definitely. The younger resources as well, they don't have the bias of doing things the same way that we've been doing them. And
Yeah.
so when they ask why, it's a two-way street. They're asking why to understand and learn, but also it means that we, as a more experienced staff, has to also think about giving them good answers. Because if you think about it in a constructive way, it
Mm.
might even allow you to use the experience that you have to look at things in a different way. I think there's a term called perspective density. Like the best and most robust
Yeah.
solutions come when you have a number of perspectives looking at that
Yeah.
challenge or that solution from many different points of view.
And that makes complete sense. And I think that also sort of dovetails into that concept of, when you're hiring or building teams, you actually need to look for people with different perspectives. And a lot of companies might get that disillusion of different perspectives, meaning that they match the company culture. So yeah, I think it's an interesting concept. You want to actually get people from different backgrounds, and different levels engaged in these different conversations that are happening.
I truly believe there are
And
different type of intelligences and there are different sort of interests that people have. And
yeah,
I think I agree with you. The best teams are the ones where there is that diversity. And I think too often we think of diversity just in terms of race and age and gender. But
yeah,
diversity is a lot also to do with diversity of thought and diversity of
mm,
context and diversity of backgrounds.
yeah. I like that. We almost need to change the term DII to
Yeah.
DEIT.
Yes.
And Smita, I mean, you also spoke about innovation within teams. You come from a field that is highly technical, highly regulated, and you guys are pushing out projects, straight after each other. How do you allow room for innovation and not get caught up in this project churn? What works, what doesn't work in your perspective, and what advice do you have to companies in this project environment that are looking to create more innovation from their teams?
I mean, it's difficult, but it also can be as easy as having engaged resources. I feel that
Mm,
a lot of engagement actually comes from an individual, someone being motivated. Another anecdote, the CEO of Autodesk had spoken about how in the past we've always had a relationship with our manager. It's a very colonial way of doing things. We work really hard for our manager and make him look good, and he in turn makes
mm,
sure we get a good salary and we're looked after in the company. But given the way that things change now, that doesn't work for so many reasons. A, people move around so often. So, that manager might be a manager only for the next couple months. But also,
yeah,
we no longer sort of move up a ladder in a linear fashion. There are so many opportunities and our job types are changing and evolving that you never want to be in the position where you're limited to your progression based on your manager. And so what he said rather is that you should have that as an individual, you should have a relationship with you and your career, and then you and the company you work for. And while what you want from your career is in line with what you're getting at your company, you're in the right place. And when it's at perpendicular to each other, then you're no longer in the right place and you're going to be disengaged. And
yeah,
what I have found is that the people who are the most effective are the people who are exactly where they want to be. And the way that
yeah,
you have people exactly where they want to be is A, they need to know where they want to be. So
yeah,
goal setting for me is very important. I would say it's not the SMART goal system. So measurable
mm,
goals they're not my cup of tea. I have a different way of goal setting. But having the people on my team know what they want from their career, a year basis, but also long term. And me knowing and me giving them the opportunities leads them to be engaged and self motivated. And those resources are the ones who are consistently pushing themselves to try new things, to learn, to develop those
yes,
around them. It's a
yes.
wonderful cycle that keeps giving.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I mean, you've mentioned that you don't like this conventional concept
Yeah.
of smart KPIs. Tell us what that means.
It's not probably my most popular opinion, but I'm not a very in the box person. And so for me, the SMART goal measurement system has always been very restrictive. And I mean, you hear it from other people as well, right? Someone's put so much of effort in thinking of these finite details, and then something doesn't work, and then that whole goal is spoiled. What I prefer doing with the people I mentor, look after, is something called theme setting for the year. So at the beginning of the year, you choose 3 to 4 themes that you want to change in your life or build in your life. And it's not about just work. It's sort of larger value in your life. So for me this year, because of some personal injuries, my health was very important. I just got recently married, so sort of building a home with my husband was important. And then developing new solutions was another thing that was important to me, the creativity side. So essentially, you set 3 or 4 themes that you want to develop that year, and you brainstorm all the ideas or all the actions you could do in that year to further at that facet of your life. And the beauty of that is that you're not fixated on, I will attend this course or I will do this. If that course comes up and I go for it, yes. If I don't, there are 10 other more actions I can try. Or even during the year, if I find something else I didn't think of at the beginning of the year, I could do that action. And so you focus on the direction you want your life to move, and you're more adaptable on the actions to get there. And you evaluate it
Yeah.
half year and at the end of the year. And
Yeah.
surprisingly, I know people might say, it's not so, because it's not so distinctive, it might not be so actionable. I've found a lot of people are a lot more successful being able to adapt with their actions than it very
Yeah.
tangible.
Yeah. And I think that's really important, this idea of running off themes, because if people have these goals that are so linear and finite in achieving them, as you know,
Mm,
especially in like project environments or any sort of work environment, things come up, you don't achieve whatever that goal is by that milestone, and you do start becoming disengaged, and it's quite
despondent,
hard
very
to,
much.
yeah, exactly. And to build yourself back up and be like, oh my gosh, I'm behind on these goals. Rather have something that's a loose framework that is achievable and also agile.
Yes. I mean, we speak about these concepts a lot, right? Adapting,
Mm.
agility. And I think they're popular terms for a reason. We need them. And I think that's why I like applying that to sort of goal setting. Also on the flip side,
Yeah,
imagine if an even bigger opportunity that you wouldn't have thought about comes in the middle of the year, right?
yeah,
Then you want to pivot to chase that opportunity rather than the smaller actions that you had at the beginning, because that was seemingly achievable. This just allows
yes,
people to really move with purpose and direction, but to
yeah,
be agile enough to accept the right opportunities.
yes, yeah. And also, I mean, on that point, you spoke a lot about people opening up because it's personal life as well.
Mm,
How do you build that trust with your team and your employees so that they do open up? I mean, some people might be in massive debt, and that's not exactly the first thing they want to tell you and
no.
say, I need to achieve these finance goals.
So the thing is, I'm very honest with the people I work with. I'm open about the things I'm winning at, and I'm open about the things that are vexing me. There might be a few swear words involved sometimes. I'm very, very open. And I think when I have the one-on-one sessions, what I've found is that that openness is
Mm,
often returned.
yeah,
And from that, I've actually never been in a situation where the people I have mentored or coached actually voluntarily brought their their personal and professional facets into the conversations. Because the thing is, we are
mm,
very connected. We're not just, work beings. Our personal
yeah,
life influences us drastically. And that influences our performance. It influences how we are to other people in the office. And we were talking about engagement. I have nothing
mm,
wrong with someone saying that their motivation right now, what they want from their career, is financial security. There is nothing wrong. I
mm,
mean, although I ended up loving engineering, the reason why I chose civil engineering was because I needed a bursary to study, and I needed a career that
mm,
would offer me security, financial security. It worked out really well,
yeah.
but that is a legitimate concern.
Yeah, I suppose understanding those underlying factors is really important. And I think maybe also as a leader, being cognizant of how you approach staff based on that. I mean, like you rightly said, it's personal life and work are not in isolation of each other. So being cognizant of what your employees' personal time is and respecting that time is also really important, but marrying that to that engagement where you're getting the most out of them within the time that you're working together.
Yes. So it also requires a certain amount of maturity, which I try to get right, but sometimes it's not always that easy. So the thing is, when you're having these conversations, when it comes to the professional side, that is what you have to do. The personal components is not something you can ask of someone. It has to be something
Yeah.
that they voluntarily want to discuss. And then I think there's also a fine line between you in a professional capacity of what you can or can't do with that information. So
Yeah.
sometimes just listening is all you can do, but sometimes just listening is helpful. There are other times where understanding that personal context can help in the professional space. So it's sort of juggling or balancing that.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I mean, you've touched on this element of, individual goal setting and management around the individuals. I know when we initially chatted, you'd mentioned to me, oh, you are in TP and you are in TP, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. I actually what's really phenomenal about that is I swap between an ENTP and an ENTJ, depending on the sort of role I'm in at that moment, but around that personality type,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. I suppose it depends on what your stress factors are as well, to which
Yes,
personality type you're
definitely.
going into. But I mean, have you ever used that, and maybe some examples here, use personality to communicate better or build trust with employees? Like, one of the things that always gets me is a lot of companies use personality assessments. They engage with external providers, and then the external providers just dump like a whole lot of information on them, and they're almost like, what do I do with this? I actually don't know how to apply it.
Yeah.
What are the soft elements that work and don't work in your experience, and any advice or experiences around that you can share?
So over my career, I think I've done almost every sort of popular personality testing.
Mm,
And my company uses the Strengths Finders, the Clifton Strengths Finders test. And there's a
mm,
lot of value in that because it focuses on people's strengths. What I have found though personally is that the biggest value to I really find a lot of value in personality testing, but I
mm,
find the biggest value is actually to the individual themselves.
mm,
Self-awareness, I think, is one of the most useful tools a person can have. Because if someone is
mm,
self-aware and they understand that they're changing all the time, so they're aware enough to know how they are changing and their needs are changing and their wants are changing and their behaviors are changing. And if they're aware of that, they know what they want from their career. They know what they want, they know what they can deliver, they know what they have to offer. That is the most
yeah,
engaged resource you have in your team.
yeah,
Because if that is very clear, A, you get the best out of them, but B, they're also getting the best for themselves. And that makes
yeah,
them even more motivated. And that is where innovation lies.
yeah,
Innovation doesn't happen because you tell someone you need to come up with something innovative. Innovation happens where
yeah.
someone wants to do something better than they've done it before.
Yes, I like that. I like that idea, because it's so important to be self-aware. I mean, you're never going to be able. You're going to be so blindsided by, you know, opportunities to improve or do better. But I think also that comes down to all levels. It's not just the employees, but the managers as well. And I think it's also really tied into, like we said, that feedback. One of the things, so when I started my university, when I went to Rhodes, I started doing started off with fine arts. And one of the things I always used to chuckle about was the concept of constructive criticism. And we'll do our art pieces, and everyone in the class, 40 people, would come crit your artwork and tell you how crap it was, or
Oh, wow.
whatever it was. You ended up getting a pretty thick skin. But I think there is this element of, and also this conversation around communication and being honest, but how you present that information to people in a way that they can be self aware, but not overly critical.
Yeah.
Some importance around how that's communicated to them. I mean, do you have any thoughts on how to be honest without necessarily breaking down someone's, or the trust that you've built with them, or, their willingness to
Yeah.
improve?
I can tell you what I do. I strive to do my best, but obviously it's this for anyone, there's always going to be room for improvement in this space, right? The first thing I think is in order for you to do this, you have to give feedback positive and negative. So the positive is a bit
Mm,
easier, but what I like to do is when someone does a good job, and remember I told you the engineering structure is quite flat. The people directly reporting to you are, only a certain amount, but the whole day you're working with people doing amazing things. When someone does something really well, I send them an email in writing and I CC their manager telling them that this is what was done. This is why I thought it was so special and thank you. And it works for a number of reasons. The first thing is that you're giving recognition where it's due. It's not made up kind of fluffy, at the end of the year, where you were really hardworking. This was phenomenal. Thank you. You added value in this way. It's tangible. You're also giving them credit in front of their manager, which helps them in terms of their performance because they can save that email and use it for their performance assessments. So not only is it
mm,
helping them in terms of recognition, but it's helping them in terms of salary increases and promotions and things like
yeah,
that. And I think that, and you do it when it happens, right? It's not at the end of the year. It's so much easier when someone does a really good job to tell them. And I think if you're
yeah,
honest about when people do amazing jobs, people are also open then to the negative feedback.
yes,
And this is where I think, okay, so no one likes conflict. I don't think, like, if I hear someone saying they like conflict, I'm like, there's something wrong with you, buddy, right? But conflict is also necessary, and those negative items are sometimes necessary. Being fake is not a great thing because if you do that that criticism with like this like very fakeness, or
mm,
I feel like people see that insincerity and your message
mm,
never comes across right. Also, what I
yeah,
don't like is when people give those general warnings to the crowd, like it's come
yeah,
to our attention that this, like that also doesn't work because now one or two bad things that have been done gets, paintbrushed across a whole lot of people. And then like everyone's sitting there trying to figure out, they're talking about me, did I do this? And then there's
yeah,
this like uncertainty and this like fear. And then there's also this like general depression. When it was one
yeah,
thing, a one
yeah,
person that did one thing wrong. And then it
yeah,
makes it like it spreads that messiness. If
yeah,
someone does something consistently wrong, I find it easier just to honestly speak to them. But you always have to do it with respect and you have to make it not personal. That person is not a problem. It's something that
yeah,
happened that is a problem. It's an action that is a problem. And so having these quiet one-on-one talks where you said, this is what happened. Why did you? First give them the opportunity to explain because there might have been a reasoning. And then you can discuss why this wasn't the outcome that was needed and why this didn't work. And give that person a chance to learn from that. You get those instances where, it's not getting better and you have to move towards more disciplinary action. But I think just at
yeah,
the onset, having those honest discussions of didn't like, can you explain what happened? I don't think
yeah.
anyone really goes out of their way to do things to harm others.
Yeah, and I think the tangible examples are important there. But I took away three things from that conversation that I think are really powerful. So the one concept that you speak about is that acknowledgement to their managers on what they've done well, and sometimes maybe what they haven't done well. But I think for companies that is so valuable, not only for an individual's growth, but also from the perspective of once you start understanding what someone's superpowers are, you can start pulling them into the relevant problems or challenges that need solved, from a project to internal growth or innovation within a company. So having that communication on what people do well and don't do well is critically important. The other thing that sort of came out of that, or that I took away, is when you mentioned that being careful about not creating that space of confusion for the receivers where there's a group message saying something went wrong, but not specifically going and talking to those employees, that really does come back to that element of personalities and people being so different. So, like you said, the person that might have done the mistake, they're completely oblivious to it. And then you've got some personalities that are super critical and self-conscious that are starting to go absolutely mental, not knowing if they were the ones with the issues, and they become maybe disengaged or more nervous to communicate and speak up, which is critical.
Exactly. That is definitely a culture killer.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing that also sort of springs to mind is that mass communication. I know a lot of employees now, if a manager goes and sends something that is like just a group message around not doing something right or something that they may be not happy with, a lot of employees go and chuck that into ChatGPT and get a perception on what the leadership skills are of that manager. So I think being very attuned into the message that you're giving out there and what it actually means is something that managers and leaders need to be quite aware of, and how that, that ripple effect happens within the company from maybe what hasn't actually been. And Samista, any final advice that you would like to give young engineers who not only want to lead projects, but lead people effectively?
This is quite a difficult one because, there's so many things you can do. But I think, okay, for me, one of the themes of today's conversation, right, has been self-awareness. So spending time understanding
Mm,
what you want for your career, I think is very important. And knowing that that's going to change is also very important, but having some sense of direction is important.
yeah,
Knowing that we're not living in a very linear world. So our careers are
yeah,
not like it was 20 or 30 years ago where there was a set path for you. We are living in an environment
yes,
now where there are a lot of changes. Just because you studied to be a certain thing, that thing can evolve into many different opportunities. So be open and aware of those opportunities. And then I think the last thing, two
okay,
piece of advice links to being open to doing things differently, is being more aware of the value that we create. So the work we do needs to have meaning. And we shouldn't just do it because
mm,
that's how it's done, but rather question. And I think that's the value of youth. And then the last piece of advice is to be honest and kind. I think working with people, the two biggest things is respect and honesty. And you can learn from there and you can
yeah.
adapt from there. But just having those two intentions set right is important.
Yeah, that's really awesome advice. And I think a lot of our listeners, what we've discussed and unpacked, it's really tangible that they can take away and apply it. So thank you so, so much, Samista, for sharing your insights and perspectives.
It's a
But
pleasure.
before you go, where can our listeners connect with you?
I maintain a very robust LinkedIn profile, so you're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. But if you have any other questions, you're also welcome to email me. My email address is my first name, samista.j@gmail.com. I'd be happy to take any further questions.
Awesome. Thank you so, so much. And again, thanks everyone for listening. If you haven't already, remember to subscribe, follow us on LinkedIn for the latest updates. Thanks, Samista. Have a wonderful day ahead.
Thanks, Andy.